Hey, it's Tpok, and I am back in Symphonic Rain. Sorry this wasn't up yesterday, but we're gonna celebrate Natale today, so I awoke earlier than usual and began getting ready for the day. It was the same as every year, only the person I was meeting and my outfit were different.
ほら、もう出ないと間に合わないんじゃない？
We won't be if I run.
落っこちないようにするの大変なんだから、歩いて行けるくらいの時間にしてよね。
You could say Forney was being selfish again, but I accepted it with a smile. We wouldn't be able to spend much time together after this, so I felt obligated to comply with her wishes for now at least. Sorry, let me just put on my uniform. I did as I said and got into my uniform, and with that, I was ready to go outside. Just by inhaling the chilly air of the alleys, I could tell it was the morning of Natale. The lack of pedestrians in the immediate vicinity made the atmosphere seem all the more ceremonious. I shivered from the cold. I got worried about the fairy on my shoulder for a second, but then remembered that wasn't necessary.
寒い？
I'm pretty cold, yeah. I answered, and as my mind began to wander to the mailbox at the entrance of the apartment building. But I quickly drove out that thought, as the letter wouldn't have arrived yet, and even if it had, I wouldn't have the time to read it. Let's hurry along. I guess. The fact that Forney had woken me up shall remain a secret. I had to figure out a way to get inside first, so I asked about Nina, trying not to sound suspicious. Is Nina awake yet?
当たり前でしょ？毎日朝から起きてるわよ。
I see. I'll go say hi. I slipped past toward her at the front door and approached Nina, who was seated in her usual chair. Is the table all right for you? Forney responded to my soft whisper at her usual volume. Good morning.
Ah, Chrisかい。おはよう。
I bowed my head, even though she probably couldn't see that. Forney took the cue and nimbly alighted on the top of the table, then turned and waved at me. That was a very short fire alarm, if you heard that. Oops, thanks, is what she said.
ありがとう。
Huh?
挨拶しに来てくれたんだろう？
Oh, yes, thank you for making today possible, for giving me a ticket to the concert you were looking so forward to.
いいんだよ。いい演奏をたくさん聴いてきなさい。
I will, thank you.
クリス、そろそろお祈りに行かな
Wow,
いと。
that was a long time we spent in there. Ah, coming. Dorota came back inside, having grown tired of waiting. We're off then.
おばあちゃん、時間によるけど戻らないでそのまま行っちゃってもいい？
もちろんいいよ。外で食事は難しいかもしれないけど、それでも構わないからね。
はーい。
As to be expected, crowds began to form by the time we arrived at the main street. Most of the stores were closed, so these people were all here to attend church. Unlike the regular Sunday masses, today Mass was held continuously throughout the day, so that as many people as possible could attend. There also wasn't much of a ceremony. The priest wouldn't read out scriptures, nor would bread and wine be distributed. However, hymns could be heard flowing from the church the entire day. And while it was a rather troublesome procedure, it was possible to line up to receive blessings from the priest. Sorry, I've just lost my day because my audio popped up. And while it was a rather troublesome procedure, it was possible to line... Okay. The church itself was open to all, and it was possible to head right in and pray. But it was common practice to first line up in the queue, which would at times extend all the way outside to receive blessings. In the past 2 years, I used to line up alongside Arietta. While we weren't committed believers, it was somewhat of a yearly routine. It would be considered odd not to go. Normally Nina would go to church as well, but with her legs in such poor condition, she was unable to accompany us. Most would probably insist on going regardless of such handicaps. However, in this town, there were priests that went around to visit the elderly at the residence or nursing homes. I'd heard from Tora that a priest would come by Nina's house at around noon every year.
やっぱりこの時間だと人もそんなに多くなくていいね。
Really? It was like this every year for me, so I wouldn't know.
あるに感謝しなさいよ。
Is that so? Around what time do you usually go?
クリスたちに会うのが嫌だからお昼くらいにプラプラと言ってる。
Are you serious?
ほら、ぼさっとしてると人並んじゃうよ。
Tora exclaimed and scurried off ahead of me. At this point, thick streams of people heading in the direction of the church began to take shape. I trotted along the stream to catch up with Tora, who smiled while humming a verse of a hymn. What's with you all of a sudden?
ほら、聞こえない？
I strained my ears and could faintly detect something that sounded like a hymn in the distance. Can you sing this?
そのくらいは習うからね。フォルテール科ではさすがにそこまではやらないか。
We do simple vocal pieces, though.
それに今日のミサで歌っている人たちの中にも学院の生徒がたくさんいるんだよ。
Really?
今日は一日中教会で聖歌を歌っているのは知ってるよね。さすがに一楽団だけでは無理だから3つくらいに分けてそれぞれが歌っている間に他の人が休む感じでやってるのよ。だからそれなりの人数が必要だし、うちの学院でもまとまった数を毎年募集してるの。
It's all voluntary, though, right?
当たり前でしょ。食事くらいは出るって聞いたけど。
Why don't you participate?
私がやるように見える？
You do, that's why I asked, but that's just my opinion, though.
そう？まあこの時期はいろいろと忙しいからね。
I don't blame you. Everyone's free to do what they want, anyway.
そういうこと。
As our conversation continued, the voices began to grow louder. The cathedral was shrouded in fog, which, in tandem with the whole white stone of the building, made for quite the majestic sight. Oops. I wasn't normally aware of the presence of God, but whenever I came here I was reminded of it quite powerfully. There's still a lot of people in the queue. A good number of people stood in line on the plaza in front of the church. Despite the crowd, it was strangely quiet. Everyone was calm, and the area had a sort of divine atmosphere to it. It wasn't completely silent, however. You could hear some whispering here and there, a slight rustle among the crowd. Yet even that could only be heard in the short intervals of silence between hymns resounding from the church. I lowered my voice as well and whispered, "The wait should be around 30 minutes?"
思ったよりも人が多いみたい。1時間はかかっちゃうかも。
Usually it's only half that, even around this time. Tora responded and frowned as though not trying to tell me not to speak too much, then smiled as though telling me there was no helping it. She then shifted her gaze back to the front of the line, and conspicuously stared at her profile. The reason I did this was because her behavior right now strongly reminded me of another person I knew. Arietta would often produce such a helpless smile after she scolded me. The resemblance was striking. I couldn't help but notice. They were identical twins, so similarities in the shapes of their faces were a given, but on a completely different level. Anyone who knew these two well enough would no doubt feel the same way as myself. That they in fact didn't resemble each other at all. Their choice of words, their mannerisms, their strong and weak points. I was reminded of what Torta said on our way back from shopping the other day. She might have been right in saying that they were trying to compensate for each other's flaws. Time passed as we intently listened to the hymns, and we finally made it inside the church. In the main hall there were large shelves filled with holy water to the left and right of us. I dipped a finger in one and made a cross by touching my head, breast, and my shoulders. It was customary to do so. Now that we stood inside, the hymns could be heard louder than ever. Tora closed her eyes and listened. At the far back, the priest was holding up his hand above the heads of the people in line, murmuring something under his breath. A little over half the people who received their blessings remained in the church, while the remaining minority went straight for the exit. I averted my eyes from the scene to calm myself, and closed my eyes as Tora had. Normally at a mass, people would pray to reaffirm the physicality of their existence. Put simply, since God existed only as a spirit, it was impossible for a man to talk to or envision him directly. People would often forget the spiritual part that existed within them, and would instead be preoccupied with material things such as wealth. The purpose of the Mass was for them to reaffirm their existence and report their deeds to God, and the mediator between man and God, the one to deliver their prayers, was the priest. That is why people would go to church to pray, for a priest was present there. By the time I opened my eyes, it was almost our turn. Since it was a double line, I would receive blessings together with Tora. When the people in front of us stepped away from the priest, the two of us bowed. It was finally our turn. Please bless us, Father, we proclaimed simultaneously, and took a step forward. I lowered my head as the priest raised his hand, and it came to hover above my head. He then muttered something under his breath. It was in an ancient language. I wasn't sure as to its meaning, but I could recognize a few words of it. They were no doubt passages from a holy scripture, and while I wanted to listen, I had trouble processing what he said. The large palm of his hand touched the top of my head, and that was the end of it. I glanced aside to see how Tora was doing. With her eyes closed, she received her blessing silently. I found myself staring at her profile again. Her expressionless face bore an astounding resemblance to that of my sweetheart. Considering they were twins, this shouldn't have come as a surprise, but I couldn't help but feel that there was something else about it.
行くよ
She whispered, informing me that she was done. We stepped out of the queue and I whispered back, so what to do now?
もう少し残るんでしょ
Ah, sure. I was about to suggest the same thing, but it was apparently obvious enough for Tora to share the same thought. The people on the sides of the line who had stayed behind had their eyes closed in meditation, offering their prayers to God. We followed their example. And I looked back on myself. Thinking back, I have been acting pretty self-centered lately. There was a partner issue, not to mention all the people I dragged along with it. I couldn't put all my thoughts into words, simply pictured them in my mind. Ari, Forney, Miss Cordell, Asino, and finally the person standing next to me, Tortanita. I lost track of how long we prayed. Well, quite a long time, over an hour. There was a sudden silence in the short interval between hymns. It triggered me to open my eyes, and I caught Torta staring at me this time. What is it?
そろそろ行こっか
She said, and immediately set off in the direction of the exit. She might not have had any particular reason, like it had been for me when I started her before. Unable to run, nor even feeling like rushing in the first place, I lazily followed her outside.
遅い
You went out on your own. I considered her asking the reason she was staring at me, but then dropped that thought. I asked her what we should do next instead. Anyway, what shall we do now?
今がお昼前くらいかな
We went out at 9:30, so it probably is around noon. The wait was longer than I expected, but it looks like we went too early in spite of that.
1時間遅かったら並ぶのも1時間伸びるのよだからこの時間で正解
Oh, really?
だって見てみなさいよ
Tora stepped aside, revealing a queue that had grown considerably compared to when we first arrived. People here are more religious than I thought.
逆でしょこういう機会じゃないとミサなんて来ないから
I suppose that makes us one of them.
そういうことでこれからどうするかだったっけ
Shall we return to your place for now?
今戻るとちょうど神父様がいらしてる頃じゃないかな。お祈りはもう済ませちゃったし、練習って雰囲気でもないよね。
You have a point. That said, it's still too early to go to the concert hall.
ねえ、そういえば朝は
Not really.
それで夜まで持たせるつもりだった？
Didn't really consider it, but since we're not practicing anyway, I think it'll be fine.
3食きちんと食べる。基本でしょ？で、クリスはいつも2食か。
I rarely eat in the morning.
でも、さすがに1食ってのは見過ごせないわね。
Want to grab something to eat at my place then?
それも考えたんだけど、ちょっと街で探してみない？
In town, huh? Aren't there only a few places open today?
それでも1軒くらいはやってるんじゃないかな。まだそれほどお腹空いてないなら、少しくらいは見て回っても大丈夫でしょ。
Yeah, I'm not that hungry, so sure, let's.
じゃあ決定ね。泊まってても寒くなるだけだから、早速行こう。
Torta cheerfully walked ahead of me again. She was constantly taking the initiative. It was always the other way around with Ari, so in a way, this was pretty relaxing. We entered a roof street, finally enabling me to wipe the rain from my hair and shoulders. Today's rain was faint though, so it hadn't perturbed me much.
そんなに気になるの？
Only a little bit. Perhaps it was her carefree nature that made me seem so oblivious to the rain.
あそこのお店はやってるみたいだね。
Torta pointed in a classy-looking restaurante. It was an open-air cafe set into the new town. Often seen in the new town, mostly visited by people of age. As a mere student, I didn't feel like eating there, even if today was a special day.
高そうだね。
Maybe we should just go home.
もうちょっと見て回ろうか。
Okay. After a while, we arrived at the plaza in the center of the main street that connected the new town with the old town. I didn't know which period it dated from, but a beautiful grand dome reminiscent of the cathedral covered the skies, protecting passers-by from the rain. The dome's elaborate pattern of bronze and glass lit through a good amount of light, so despite the gloomy weather, it never got dark around here. Especially so on days of faint rain.
あれならどう？
Jorah said while walking, and approached a stall without waiting for my response. The simple wooden signboard leaning against it said that they were selling calzones for cheap. Nothing else was written, so it appeared to be all they had. On top of the stall, it said Marco's Calzones in large letters, perhaps referring to the well-built man making calzones inside. Sure, never had them before though.
私もそうだよ。
Not even you? A calzone is a sort of rolled-up pizza. All stuffing is contained within a roll of dough, making for a suitable takeout snack. I'd rarely seen them over here, but they were apparently pretty common in the southern parts of the country. I cooked for myself and never really stepped out of the house even on free days, so suffice to say I didn't have much of a chance to come in contact with them. I expected Tor to have had them before with her friends or something though.
じゃあこれでいいね。でもよかったね。こんな日にまでやってくれて。
I'd say it's a good business when everything else is closed. As expected, they were not unfounded, as when we got closer, I could see many people crowding around the stall. In addition to it being lunchtime, anyone coming from the cathedral like us would be at least a little hungry. A fragrant aroma reached my nostrils from afar, which helped to make me hungry now as well. Then let's go.
わかった。
Okay guys, I am going to end it here, so we'll continue this Natale experience next time. Thanks for watching.